What does it mean to be addicted to appearance? I want to bring up a couple of examples of this. So when we think about body image issues, we tend to think about what? Usually eating disorders, right? Anorexia, bulimia, things that tend to fall in what we would call extreme behaviors. However, there's this whole gamut of body image issues that you see on the screen. And I want you to take a minute and look at that and think about how really being addicted to appearance, struggling with body image, or what culture will sometimes call body dysmorphia disorder, what those things really mean and entail, and that we put words to it that we can all understand, because these are things that to some degree we all struggle with. We are living in an image-obsessed culture that is all about the image you put forth out there. I'll say this again probably in my later talk this afternoon about social media, but isn't it all about image? Isn't it all about what we're portraying to the world around us and how they see us? Let me just say, so anorexia is the struggle with being thin. Bigorexia, for those who aren't familiar with that term, is the exact opposite, and you mostly see it where? Think for a minute. It's seen with bodybuilders. It's seen with steroid use. So what was notoriously a female issue in the past is now more and more becoming an issue that guys struggle with as well. They just struggle with it in different ways. It can manifest in weightlifting and bulking up and steroid use. But again, even with the onslaught of social media, how image really captures us and the image we're trying to portray. So again, what we tend to think of as a female issue, and it does tend to be, but more and more you're seeing in culture how we're equally objectifying women and men alike. And that's not the kind of equality we want going on, right? We want to really be image bearers of Christ in the midst of that. Imagine being in a room full of mirrors for a minute. And everywhere you look in that room of mirrors, you are looking at what? You're looking at yourself. And that's what mirrors do. They isolate yourself. And people who struggle, when we struggle in a way that is consumed with it, it's like walking around all day long with mirrors around you. And everything that you do reflects back on you. Or another way I like talking about it, even in counseling, it's like walking around with a handheld mirror all day long. And so everybody I talk to, I can see you, but it's always clouded by this mirror of what you're thinking back at me. And so I like this imagery because it helps us think that mirrors isolate us. We can only see others through the image in which they see us. I'm trying to turn around with you guys. So we can only see others through the lens in which they see us. So if you have this mirror up in front of you, I'm engaging with you, but I'm always engaging with you wondering, what are you thinking of me? How are you seeing me? How am I coming across to you right now? Now think a minute. I can't, if I were standing here totally consumed with what you were thinking of me right now, how could I really be loving you? How could I really be trying to understand you or know you if it all means I need to have something from you? It's what am I getting from you? So mirrors isolate, they enslave us to an image or what other people think of my image. So there you see that enslavement language again, right? That we're hearing the idolatry of the heart, how we become enslaved to certain things that can rule us, our desires, good desires even, right? Good desires that can become deadly desires because they begin to control us. It prevents us from being known and knowing others. It destroys relationships. It separates me from you. There can't be a real vulnerability in being known if we spend all of our time trying to present a certain way, trying to present a certain appearance, trying to present whether it's in appearance or looks, or it's in success, or it's in certain standards, or it's even in moral behavior, right? If I am more enslaved to what people think of me, then I'm living for the approval of man, not the approval of the Lord. I'm living afraid of what others are going to think of me, which means I'll never really be vulnerable with you. Instead, I'll be consumed with what you think of me. So we become obsessed with self. There's no room for concern for others. We seek to be admired more than to be known. We are raising a generation who cease to be admired more than they cease to be known. Where, again, I'm jumping ahead to my next talk, but where we look to how many likes we get online. And this isn't just a younger generation, this is us. This is an older generation. The struggle of appearance, the struggle of image is nothing new under the sun, right? Isn't that what Ecclesiastes say? That we all struggle. And we struggle in ways that are nothing new under the sun. They just manifest themselves in new ways. So the question you and I should always start with before we help others is, in what ways can I be drawn to an image rather than be an image bearer of the Creator? What does it look like? What image am I really seeking to portray in my life? So how these mirrors can isolate us. So our battle with the mirror, does it shape the way we interact? Does it shape what we do? There's really great research out there that says people, they take polls all the time, and how they do this, I'm not quite sure, but that 90% of women will disengage from an activity or some life activity out of fear of how they look. Think about that. 90% of people, they won't show up at church, or they won't go somewhere, or they won't do something because of appearance or because of the fear of what people think of them and how they look. The issue is not the behavior itself, like going to the gym, like wanting to look nice. We can become very stoic in our mentality about things. It's not the behavior itself often, but it's the degree to which it dictates our worth. And that's the key, because I never want to talk about body image issues and then argue a stoic lifestyle, because what a stoic lifestyle does is equally make it about appearance, right? That I am only godly if I appear in a stoic way. Well, that's not the God we serve. We have a God of liberty and creativity. You can't look in creation and say there's a stoic God out there. He's a God of beauty, and he demonstrates it. But all that beauty is meant to point back to the Creator, right? And so even in the way we have liberty, how we live our lives, how we dress, how we appear, it is always meant to bear image to a Creator, not to the creation, not to itself. So attempts to battle the false image. It's really interesting to watch culture do this, and I've done a lot of research, I've watched a lot of things, so I want to give you a couple examples. Jean Kilbourne came out with, she has done multiple documentaries called Killing Us Softly, and if you go on YouTube, you can actually see clips of them. I think you might even be able to see whole videos that she's done, documentaries, all on the objectification of women in media and how it started back in the 50s and 60s with magazines and how it's continued. And then how she's demonstrated how it's equally now starting to happen to men as well, and the objectification of appearance and body image in youth, and the impact that has on our younger generation. And that's really important to understand as well, because we're surrounded by, the argument is maybe 3,600 images a day. Images of being told what we should like, what we shouldn't like, that tells us about values and sexuality and romance and ideals. So 3,600 images a day, imagine that you are constantly bombarded with that shape how you think, whether it's billboards or magazines or now social media or computer or commercials. We have many children in our home. We have 5 children, and at a very early age, we began teaching them about commercials. So they'd watch little shows, and we'd actually pause them at the commercials because we thought the commercials were the most damaging things for them to watch at that time frame. Why? Because it was just teaching them to lust after things. So at a very early age, we would talk about this. We'd say, guys, we're going to pause the commercials. Why? Well, because you can get up, go get a snack, run to the bathroom, and the commercials are really trying to teach you that you have to have this toy to be happy. And if you don't have this toy, your life isn't going to go well, you're not going to be happy, and think how happy you are right now until you watch this commercial, and you're not going to be happy. And they often break, and so we spoke about this and took time explaining to the kids that advertisement really is about making you feel like your life can't be content without the product they have to sell. Your life can't be great without this newest lipstick or these newest Nike sneakers or the new clothes or the new Apple product that comes out every single year, right? Life can't be worth living if I don't have the updated fill in the blank. So at a very young age, we were teaching our kids this, and it's interesting how it just reveals your heart. So we had 2 little boys at the time and just really squeaky, funny voices. And one day they were watching some kind of cartoon, and one of them was watching the commercial that followed it, and he goes, "Oh, I so want that thing." And his little brother's in the background going, "William, it's just going to break in 2 minutes, and it's not worth your time. They're just trying to convince you to spend your money." And he was mimicking everything I had said. I'm like, "You go, Andrew." And William, I don't know what's wrong with you. I've taught you this for years, not sinking in. But that's our hearts, right? And it works on you and I too. We are not above this. You see an image long enough, you're convinced, oh, it would be really nice to have that, or I must need that, or that is why advertisement exists. And so there are people and organizations that have worked really hard to actually demonstrate that advertisement exists to sell products, and it exists to convince you that your life is incomplete, that you are imperfect, and that your life can't be satisfactory unless you have what it is they have to sell you. So imagine if 3,600 times a day you're hearing messages like that, how combative you and I have to be in our own hearts, guarding our hearts against the cultural ideals and the cultural values that are there. So that's Jean Kilbourne. She's attempting to do that, to demystify it and talk about the dangers of that. In 2012, Dove International did a study. So the Dove company did a study on beauty and body image and women. They did it, I think it was a 9/11 country study, over 3,300 women and young girls. And they interviewed them, and really interesting stuff came out of this. So for example, those who are from different cultures almost always wanted what another culture has. So if you had dark skin, you wanted light skin. If you had light skin, you wanted dark skin. If you had blonde hair, you wanted dark curly hair. If you had dark curly hair, you wanted blonde hair. The very interesting thing that came from that was the grass always looked greener on the other side kind of mentality. The other interesting distinction was that you found how cultures valued certain things like wealth, like height, like intelligence, and how cultural values shaped what women and men thought of themselves as well. Dove, as a result, began putting out this positive message about body image issues in women, and they began this real neat program of just commercial after commercial of trying to promote healthier images of women in their commercials, positive messages to girls. And really another interesting thing that came out was the need for mentoring between mothers and daughters. Well, why would that surprise us, right? The younger generation mentoring, the older generation mentoring the younger generation. And that was a theme that young people needed their parents involved. They needed people mentoring them. So they put forth all these great commercials. If you Google Dove commercials online, if you haven't seen them, some of them are tear-jerkers, some of them are really neat, some of them are a little weird. But you have the whole gamut of them putting out this positive message towards women. And the interesting thing is, guess what happened? Over that 2 years of putting out these positive message about feeling good about who you are and how you were made, their sales declined. They didn't go up. They actually declined. Why? Because we were believing the lie. We didn't want to hear the positive message. We wanted to rather believe the lie that we need a certain image to look good. Think about that for a minute. There is our struggle. And so that's shocking, but it's not really shocking because anything really that we try to do that's void of God is not going to be fulfilling. And so here you had several different organizations and companies that were trying to do really good work. Why wasn't it enough? And the first thing I'd say is, well, it's void of God. Any true beauty, anything that really points back to what is good and right and natural and healthy really has to point back to the creator of the universe. And whenever you take him out of it, it will not satisfy. So if we believe that creation is beautiful, that God is the author of beauty and creation and all that is good and rightly ordered, then we know God creates, the world corrupts. And there you have it. God creates beauty, the world corrupts it. God creates relationships, the world corrupts it. God creates sex and sexuality, the world corrupts it. God creates relationships, and the world, or we, corrupt them. And so here is there very good organizations saying, this is corrupted, this is bad. But they were only getting a piece of it because they weren't going back to the creation of it, how God intended it to be, right? And if we never go back, we don't talk about how things were created to be and what is good and right about it, then we'll always get wrong the corruption about it, or we'll only talk about the corruption about it. Now that's really important, especially in counseling each other or counseling a younger generation or working with anybody who struggles with body image issues, because we want to say, what do you go back to that's the creation of it? And I'd argue we're image bearers, right? We are made to live in an image. What's the corruption of it? We seek after all these false images that are put out there in culture for us. So God creates, he created us as image bearers, made to reflect him accurately. And our hearts are prone to wander. They wander towards the corrupted image. And that's what we keep seeing out there. So any agenda really has to focus on the heart. The thoughts, the desires, what am I wanting, what am I pursuing? And it'd be simplistic to say body image, appearance is about appearance, but it's motivated in lots of different ways. It's how we see success and romance, what we think it means to be loved or accepted or valued, and we're finding identity and worth in it outside and apart from Christ. And that's key, but what sometimes motivates it can vary. It can be different. There is still a mentality that I deserve happiness, good circumstances, good self-image now. I'm pursuing good self-esteem for the sake of making myself better. There was the Dove commercials. Feel good about you because you're self-actualized. You should make yourself feel better. Well, there's still the corruption of it, right? I am not made to live for me. I am made to live and reflect the Lord. So what they were trying to do is they were trying to say it's not about the external. It's a good message. It's about the internal. But what you and I can't forget is ultimately about the eternal, that we live for eternity, that I'm not about the external. This is a passage I'll keep coming back to, but Corinthians that talks about we have this treasure in jars of clay, and that this all-surpassing power is of God, not of us. It says, outwardly we are wasting away, but inwardly we are being renewed day by day. And there you have this picture that outwardly we are going to fall apart, we are going to die, but we're being renewed inwardly. We live for the eternal, and that's what our goal is. So what does it look like to move to that? The answer is not to focus more on ourselves, but to know what our appropriate focus is. And it's not about me. The focus shouldn't be on me at all. I shouldn't worry about it. If I'm here speaking to you all, my goal is to love you well, to speak well, to honor the Lord. It's not about me at all. And for us to wake up every day and live our lives saying, Lord, help me to reflect your image. Help me to reflect the person you've called me to be. And in that, there's utter liberty. But it means that the desires of our heart, all the things we're talking about, that we're enslaved by the things this world has to offer, rather than drawn to the things that God created us to be. So image bearers, this is the biblical foundation for thinking about image and appearance altogether, right? We are made to bear an image. We are created to reflect something and someone. And how quickly our hearts wander to looking to what's around us, to what people value around us, and we're running after, we're becoming enslaved to the images that this world has to offer. So doesn't that make sense too, going back to the Dove commercials, that even people in other countries, you're looking at what does culture say? I'm looking around me saying, well, who informs what I value? Who informs what that image should be, and how often we let culture do that? Or we let the people that we want to impress, the people that we love, form that, instead of standing before Scripture and before the Lord and saying, who have you called me to be? What does it look like for me to reflect my life accurately to you? The corrupted image lures us away. And here's where I love saying this. I use this a lot when I'm talking and counseling. God creates, the world corrupts. Are you moving towards the creation of it? Or are you moving towards the corruption of it? And what does that look like? The interesting thing, too, is that great and small exist in the human exchange. You can't look through Scripture and not see there are the poor and there are the rich. There are the beautiful and there are the unattractive. There are the successful and there are those who are little known. They exist. And Scripture from Genesis to Revelation talks about that. And you also see that God uses the least of these. God uses the broken. He uses the jars of clay. God doesn't go for the most beautiful, attractive, the most successful. He turns that whole kingdom upside down, and he says, what you all value, what you strive after is not the kingdom of God. It's not God's economy and how he works. And instead, he turns it upside down and says, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And I shall use the least of these, and I'll use the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. So you have this biblical richness to say, we are living corpses. I forget who said that, but there's a Puritan writing where it talks about us saying we're living corpses. And every time I hear that, I think of The Walking Dead. I think of a bunch of zombies walking around, and it's not a really pretty picture. But what I do like about it is it goes back to Corinthians, and it says we're outwardly wasting away, but inwardly being renewed day by day. We are these living corpses that the light shines within us. It reflects accurately eternity and what we live for. Where what the world has, the corruption of the world, says you are death-shrouded in beauty. So inwardly, people are dying. They're corrupted inside. But we're gonna put on plastic surgery. We're gonna fix you up. We're gonna shellac you and make you look good. But it's literally death-shrouded by beauty. So you see the imagery there. And actually, this is where you need really good imagery if you're going to work with somebody who struggles with appearance or being addicted to appearances. You need to say, it's light and day, night and darkness, night and day, light and darkness. We need to understand that what you're being drawn to over here has to be the creation, not the corruption of it. The weight of glory. Let me see if I can read it from here. It says, I am not forgetting how horribly this most innocent desire is seen in our human ambitions, or how very quickly in my experience, the lawful pleasure of praise from those whom it was my duty to please turns into a deadly poison of self-admiration. But I thought I could detect a moment during which the satisfaction of having pleased those who I rightly loved and rightly feared was pure. And that is enough to raise our thoughts to what may happen when the redeemed soul, beyond all hope, learns at last that she has pleased him whom she was created to please. There will be no room for vanity then. She will be free from the miserable illusion that is her own doing. With no taint of what we should now call self-approval, she will most innocently rejoice in the thing God has made her to be. I love that because it reflects that that's what an image bearer should do, that we find rightly ordered, we can delight in who God created us to be, and we can rest in that. So 2 Corinthians, again, take a minute and read through that. And I want to give you a picture. There's this picture of, way too many times, even as Christians, and this is our culture. Our culture puts out this ideal of beauty and says, you must look like this, you must be like this. And it's like this beautifully painted vase that you put up on a shelf and you show off as an art piece. So you have that picture. But then over here, what Corinthians gives you is it gives you this picture of this clay pot that's cracked and has holes in it and is broken. And it says, you are called to be this jar of clay. Why? To show this all-surpassing power is of God, not of ourselves. So think about that for a minute. We have our Christianized version of that too, don't we? I'm called to be this perfect Christian, to have myself put together, to look, to act a certain way, to be a certain way, to present a certain way. And there's a hint of desire to be godly, but it becomes very quickly about image and the image that everybody else thinks of my image. And over here, again, the Lord's saying, be broken, be humble, be transparent, be imperfect. I am the one at work in you. I will shine forth all the more brightly in your life when you are willing to do that. Very different picture. So you take this beautifully painted vase, and you take this jar of clay with cracks and holes in it, and you put a candle in it and turn out all the lights. Which is going to shine the more brightly? And it's this beautiful picture God's given us of saying, be that clay pot because you will shine all the more brightly. My light, who I am, my spirit in you will shine all the more brightly than what this world has to offer and what has to give you. That is just a really neat picture of understanding that we need to long for something else. We need to desire something else. Young people are watching, not even young people, our peers are watching, right? We influence an older generation, a younger generation, we influence our peers. I have 2 daughters, and when they were younger, I used to do their hair for them. And so I'd go in the bathroom and I would take the brush and run it under water, and I'd start brushing their hair to get the knots out and smooth out their hair. And so one time I came home from work and I sat down on the floor with them, and so they began playing with my hair. And I thought, oh, this is great. I can take 5 minutes and take a break and rest. So I let them play with my hair. And in a few minutes, they went running into the bathroom and got this big box of barrettes and purple frizzy things and colored things and brushes. And they came out, and I was slowly being transformed into this Medusa-like character with snake appendages coming out of my head. I'm like, okay, whatever, it's making them happy, and I can take a break for a minute. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, who would have been about 5 at that time, went running into the bathroom and began putting the brush under the sink as well and getting it wet. And so she was coming out with these snake-like appendages trying to brush my hair with all these things in them. Why? Because she was mimicking what she had seen me do over and over again, right? So she goes running in and she begins doing that, and then her little sister follows suit, finds a brush, follows suit, and she's running back and forth into the bathroom doing the exact same thing. Until maybe the 3rd or 4th time in, I'm sitting on the floor and I thought, wait a minute, Kimmy can't reach the sink. Think about that for a minute. So I got on my hands and knees, and I crawled over and I looked in the bathroom, and sure enough, there she was dipping the brush in the toilet. Not the kind of imitation I'm talking about, right? It was this great picture of a little girl thinking she's imitating her mother, right? Very imperfectly, though. She thought she was doing exactly what I do. But did it matter where the water was coming from? Absolutely mattered where the water was coming from. I think sometimes you and I are a lot like that. We think we're imitating Christ. We think we're modeling similar behavior, but man, does it matter the source? It certainly matters. And that's where sometimes we're called to be this treasure in jars of clay, that the light of the Lord, that Christ shines all the more brightly in our life. We're also called to be imitators of Christ. We're also, when I think of imitators of Christ, I think of this waterfall effect, where Corinthians says, we mourn with those who mourn, we rejoice with those who rejoice, that we comfort others with the comfort we've been given, that he's a conduit, we're a conduit of Christ's life in us. And way too often, I'm over here trying to build my own little waterfall, and that's what my daughter was doing. She was not doing what I do when I do their hair in the morning. She was over here building her own version of what I do. And way too often, I think that's what we do in the image we put forth to people. And you and I, we think we're honoring the Lord in the way we present ourselves to the world around us, but we're really not expressing Christ's life in us the way we should. And I've always thought back, going back to that night where Kimmy stuck the brush in the toilet, I remember running my fingers through my hair going, well, at least this will make for a good story. And my hair got sticky, and I stopped and smelled it, and here was cucumber melon antibacterial soap in my hair as well. So I can only hope the two canceled each other out by the end of the night. That is often what we see. We see it culturally. We can point out the corruption we see culturally, but can we point out the corruption in our own lives, right? In our own hearts, our own struggles with looking at what we do and saying, am I accurately reflecting what God's called me to reflect? Or have I come up with my own version for doing that? C.S. Lewis has some great quotes that talk about this. He says, for a few minutes we had the illusion of belonging to the world. Now we wake to find that there is no such thing. We have been mere spectators. I love that, because here's again another imagery that Scripture gives us, that we're foreigners, we're aliens. We are not meant for this world, yet we strive after this world and its image that it has to present to us. And one of the things, actually might have it in here next, we'll see, but C.S. Lewis talks about how we're so easily willing to play with mud pies when there's this holiday meant for us at the sea. And so you have this wonderful imagery of playing in the mud, but there's this banquet feast waiting for us. And I think this is one of the struggles when we talk about issues with kids and teens and in counseling, that We sometimes could do a really good job of talking about, you're playing in the mud, this is mud pies. There's something so much better for you, but we don't build a real beautiful picture of what's better for us. We don't woo people to what the gospel has to say, what the Lord has to offer, that we're meant to reflect his image. And so we can talk about the corruption just like there's secular systems that will talk about the corruption, but if we don't get better about talking about the creation of it, the beauty of what God has to offer, what it means to be real image bearers and to live as his light, then we miss something really, really valuable there. And so one of the things I think we need to do a better job at is talking about, well, what are we intended to be? Not just what we're not intended to be, but what has God called us to be? What does that look like? And how do we make that look glorious? In a way, people want to walk away from what's over here and they say, this is what I want. I want to be this. That makes sense to everybody? And so I think that's the work that we really have to do, is to say, we've got to paint a better picture, a more glorious picture for people. I love The Velveteen Rabbit. Again, this is a children's book. I don't know how many of you guys know this, but it's all about this rabbit who desires to become loved. He wants to be loved. He wants to be real. And he has this exchange. He's having this conversation with his friend, and he says, "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or who have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to the people who don't understand." So again, think of how the Lord calls us to be. We're called to be a living corpse. And he says, once you really understand what beauty is, once you understand what living as an image bearer of the King really means, then that's what matters. People won't understand. Those who don't understand don't know what it means to be loved. They don't know what it means to be real. And we have a depth of understanding that should be so much more richer and so much more freeing, both to us and to those around us. He says, it would seem, C.S. Lewis again, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by a holiday offered at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. I love that last phrase, we're far too easily pleased, because it's a great example that I think sometimes we buy the lie, and again, this is what you're hearing this morning, right, about we're buying a lie that we need something to be happy, we need something else to be content. And we're buying this lie that apart from Christ, there's something more I need to find value and worth and identity and meaning. And it's not that we're asking too much of God or expecting too much of God, it's actually that we're expecting too little. We're willing to settle for the mud pies when God has infinite joy and infinite delight and infinite and intimate value in who we are created to be. He says in Mere Christianity, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what he is doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in your roof, and so on. You knew that those jobs needed doing, and so you are not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of, throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. So what I'm attempting to do is I'm attempting to give you a lot of different imagery here. Does that make sense? You have this imagery of mud pies versus a holiday at the sea, of we're willing to settle. We're far too easily pleased, right? We're willing to settle to be this decent little cottage. And God says, no, I'm going to do more work. And that more work may feel painful and hard. You may dislike it, but I'm building a palace that I intend to reside in and live in. And we want to give people this image of something far more beautiful, far more glorious. And to be honest, I think we don't have that of heaven itself. We think of eternity sometimes as something to be feared, not something to be running after and to be delighting in and looking forward to. We have to do a better job, especially when we're ministering to people who are struggling, to say, they're struggling with this mud pie. How can I show them that there's something far more glorious? How can I woo them? Not just show them, this is the mud, listen, get out of the mud. But to show them there's something far more glorious to move towards and delightful to move towards, and that's so much more freeing to move towards. Isaiah 53, so Christ models the image we are to bear. Take a moment and look at what's the image that we're called to bear. Not very appealing, is it? It's a real pick-me-up if you're struggling with issues of appearance, where Christ says, he was rejected, he was despised, he was rejected, he was a man of sorrows, he really held no beauty. Nobody wants to hear that. They don't want to say, oh, this is the image you're called to be like. But there's a humility there. There is a sense where it's not about the external, and we're living for the eternal. It's not even about just the internal. I'm not just making myself a better moral human being, but I want Christ's life expressed in me. And that means there's a level of humility. That means there's a change in affection and desires. It means that I am free and not bound by what this world says I must be, and that I'm actually striving very intentionally and moving towards being something far better. And again, what I will say ad nauseum is we have to do a better job presenting that picture. We have to move people to say, here's the struggle. So let's talk about young people for a minute. It used to be, and again, I'm going to say this in the next session, but it used to be that kids would come home from school and they would have family time. They'd be interacting with parents and adults in youth groups, Sunday school. Now, with modern day technology, kids will come home from school, they'll walk into the room, close the door, and they'll be with their peers again. They'll be on social media, they'll be online, they'll be Snapchatting, they'll be on Twitter, they'll be doing all these things. And it's literally peers interacting with peers all day long. So where does their value system come? Where does their idea of identity and image come? It is peers raising peers. I'd argue that's not very different in churches. And I'd argue it's not very different sometimes with adults, that we get consumed with what are the images out there. We get online and we think everybody's life looks better than what? Better than mine, right? Think of it for a minute. I like working in our home. We've got a nice yard. We like fixing up our house and working on our lawn. And so every once in a while, I'll pick up a magazine like Better Homes and Gardens and flip through it. Well, if you want to start coveting images, that will do it for you. Just go buy a magazine, yet alone Better Homes and Gardens. So I'm opening it up. I'm looking at Better Homes and Gardens. And you know what? I felt pretty good about the work I'd just done in my garden and my yard until I picked up that magazine. Better Homes and Gardens, better than whose? Better than mine, better than yours, most likely, right? It is meant to make you think what I have is insufficient. So what an hour ago made me happy and I felt good about, now I look at it and go, what a pig pen I live in. Why? Because there's all this imagery out here saying, if you really need to be happy, if you really want to have a nice yard, a nice home, a nice family, a nice marriage, a nice fill in the blank, follow us. We've got it. We've got the market. And we're so quick to buy into it. We're so quick to be content one moment and dissatisfied the next. And that is what those images constantly do in the culture around us. So take a minute and think about that. That's where I think our hearts wander in different directions, right? And that can be generational too, because it's what you're raised around or what's projected. And we have a new assault culturally that maybe 20 years ago we wouldn't have had. And so now you're putting forth images of women that are more feminist, that are more bold, that are more masculine. I used to joke even with the Disney princesses with my daughters that I was really careful about the messages they were getting. You look at the old school Disney princesses like Snow White and Cinderella, and although it's a happy ever ending and they get their prince, what really stands out to me is their character. These were people that were kind even in the face of evil. These were people who loved the animals, and the animals even followed after them. And I'm an animal lover, for those of you who don't know, so that really appeals to me. But you had a very different image. It was character and nature. But you look at the modern day versions of Disney and how women, and they're entitled, they're bolder, they speak their mind, a very different image we're being given. So it's like those things are at odds, that to speak boldly or bravely and to speak graciously and kindly have to be at odds, and I'd argue they don't. But language matters here, and so some of the language you use, I'm saying confusing because you hear culture and feminism use it and say, this is what it looks like to be a real woman, and you're going to be independent and outspoken and whatever the fill in the blank is. And to say, when I'm being Christ-like, you see Jesus model those things. Jesus was incredibly bold, incredibly humble, incredibly gracious, incredibly loving, incredibly strong. But it's Christ-like in the way I do that. So when I am saying, Lord, make me more like you, I really want to be a conduit of your life within me, then those things come out. Versus me trying to look for a certain character trait and be those things. Start with the home, that we're called to model it to a younger generation. And so for me as a parent, that means my kids first, but it means all around me, that even whatever liberty I have in self-expression, I always want to be aware, when could it be a stumbling block to others as well. So you don't flaunt liberties, right? You understand that they're meant to draw people to the Lord. So even in my home with my children, I've got to always be measured with how are they reading, how I present myself, how I dress, how I approach, how I interact with my spouse. Relationships are so important that I model relationship, not just appearance. That sometimes I not make it about appearance. And this is challenging from a parental standpoint of, I don't want to make dress about modesty. I want to make it about expression before the Lord. And so that's tricky, right? Because we all have different standards of sometimes what's modest, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And I'm very cautious in how I talk about that, because I want to say, before the Lord, does this honor God? And what does that look like? And how do you argue it? And so this is kind of my parenting style, that I like to engage my kids in conversations and get them thinking, because it's really easy to go into lecture mode. And it's a lot harder to draw them out and understand what's really appealing to them. And we've got boys, we've got girls. It's been really interesting. Our story is even a little different, where our kids have been adopted out of foster care, and our girls came out of a situation where they tended to overindulge. They weren't taught the skills of eating healthy, and so they would try to get food whenever they could. And we didn't want to, here I am a counselor, I work with these issues, I didn't want to create body image issues in my daughter. How am I going to talk about this? How am I going to talk about eating healthy? Which is what we made it about, It's a stewardship issue, right? So there's another word I haven't used yet, but you talk about appearance, you talk about healthy eating in terms of stewardship before the Lord as honoring God. So we talk about stewardship and how, healthy eating means this and it means that. And then a year later, come along 2 little boys we adopt. Now, these 2 little boys were failure to thrive, literally failure to thrive. They were underweight. They were not given normal food. One of my sons had probably half of his teeth missing from bottle rot. And the doctor was saying, you have got to pack food in them. So now imagine this. I have 2 little girls that were trying to teach restriction in healthy eating, and I have 2 little boys that were being told, you've got to get them to eat more. Give them milkshakes, give them high-calorie food, pack it on. And I'm like, how am I going to do this without messing them all up? I have 2 I need to tell to eat more. I have 2 that I need to tell to eat less. I'm going to give them all body image issues if I don't do this right. But when you focus, so there's a great example, feeling a little bit torn, and how do you not make it about appearance at all? How do you make it stewardship? How do you make it healthy? How do you make it good and right? And that was actually so helpful, because it really forced us to talk about it in ways I really think the Lord would talk about it, that it's stewardship of our health, stewardship of our body, not being overindulgent, taking care of ourselves and eating healthy. And for some, just to let you know, the way we handled that is we talked about healthy portions, and this is what healthy portions are. My husband and I had to be willing to model that and to eat whatever we said were healthy portions for them. And then we said, to our boys, but the doctor says they have to eat more. So whatever the doctor says goes. They get to eat what they wanted. And you had other kids over here going, oh man, that's not fair. And we say, honey, but it's good and right. We don't do fair, we do what's good and right to help you. So there was us needing to model that. There was us needing to talk about it differently to different children that we struggle with. And this goes back to in the church or in counseling or in the people you minister to, that what they're desiring after isn't always the same. For some, it is appearance. It's getting people to like them, or it is being thin or attractive. For others, it's a control issue. For others, it may be a fear of rejection. And at the end of the day, I want to show them, here's what I think you're living for. And you're hearing some of that today. You're hearing in those conversations that what is it that we're desiring after that moves us away from the Lord? And how can I then move them closer to the Lord? How can I make what God offers in that so much more desirable? So, for example, if somebody's desiring control, I need to be in control to feel safe. Or I need to do this, I need to control my eating to feel safe. And to be able to say, you know what, that's a facade. You think you're in control, but you're never meant to be in control. And only when you can completely entrust yourself to the Lord and give up complete control can you find freedom? Can you really rest? When somebody's looking to find value and meaning and appearance and being attractive or being thin enough, to be able to say, what you're living for won't satisfy. You are constantly decaying. You're constantly losing that thing which you're holding on to because it was never meant to satisfy. So I'm pointing out and helping them see what's corrupted about it. And then I'm saying, but imagine having a life that is growing in you where you will never be corrupted, where you'll live for eternity, where these things will not matter anymore, and you're giving a better value. So that's an example of me trying to say the desire is finding out what is controlling that desire for appearance or to fit in. And for a lot of teens and peers, what we see is they just want to look like the rest of their friends. They just don't want to be different. Well, then there's a whole different way you're going to be talking about it and trying to shepherd them to what is good and right. So again, identity is not found in an image, it's not found in appearance, but it's found in a person. That the more I root myself in who the Lord made us to be, the more I understand that I am a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, the more the things of this world grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace, right? I love that imagery because we have imagery bombarded at us all day long. We need imagery to replace it that says there's something more beautiful, something more glorious. And that's our prayer, that with the things of this world grow strangely dim, the more we look to the Lord, the more we look to Christ for value, for worth, for identity. Should we care about appearance at all? So again, here's where we tend to struggle that, well, beauty's just corrupted. Should we be caring about it at all? And what does that look like? And my argument to that is we have freedom. But I don't care about beauty just for the sake of beauty. I care about it because it ultimately reflects the God of beauty. And that's what I care about. You can't watch, I don't know if any of you guys have ever watched these Planet Earth videos and documentaries, or Earth, Planet Earth, the blue sea. And I love watching them until they say something evolutionary and then it turns me off completely. But if you sit there and you watch it, what is so neat about it is they take animals and bugs and they talk about how they naturally migrate and how they reproduce and all these beautiful things. And you can't watch this and say, man, God's a creative God. God is not a stoic, colorless God. He is a God of infinite liberty, imagination, beyond comprehension, but it's rightly ordered, and it reflects back to him. And that's the neat thing about creation. All creation is meant to proclaim the glory of God, right? Scripture says that all over the place. We are part of that creation. We are meant to reflect the glory of God as well. And we've got to really struggle and fight that battle of allowing that to be corrupted in the way we do it. And so there's all levels of versions of that, whether it's material possessions, materialism, whether it is beauty and plastic surgery. And if you look at some of the trends, plastic surgery has been going up and up. Younger and younger kids getting plastic surgery as graduation presents right out of high school. It's amazing. And that parents are okay with it. Why? Because parents are believing this lie too. This is where it starts with us as adults to say we've got to bring a better picture to our kids, that these are not the things that will satisfy and give value. And what ultimately, I think you take being addicted to appearance to its extreme, you see issues of sexuality unfolding, right? You see people wanting to become something other than what they are because happiness is elusive when it's not in Christ. When I look to this world to satisfy, then I will look to every image or any image I can find and say, maybe this will satisfy. Maybe this will give me peace. And at the end of the day, we've got to say it's corrupted. But it's not enough to talk about the corruption. We've got to get better and better at talking about the creation of it.